10 years of not being invited to my own family reunion, 10 years of being edited out of photos, abandoned in silence. They said I was too sensitive, too distant, too dramatic. But this time, I didn't fight for a seat at their table. I bought the whole beach house, and they would have to say my name to get in. In this moving tale of family and self-assertion, Kaya Gellhorn has been excluded from her own family gatherings for an entire decade. Rather than continuing to accept her fate of being forgotten, she discovers an unexpected opportunity when she learns that the beach house where all family reunions take place is up for sale. With the help of a secret trust arrangement from her late grandmother, Kaya decides to reclaim her voice in a way no one in her family could have anticipated. This isn't a story about revenge, but a journey of seeking acknowledgement and healing deep emotional wounds. I wasn't invited to my own family's reunion. Again, 10 years of silence, edited photos, and empty chairs with my name never spoken. They said I was too sensitive, too distant, too dramatic. But this time, I didn't fight for a seat at their table. I bought the whole beach house. Monday mornings weren't supposed to feel like this. Usually, they began with coffee gone cold before the first sip, a half-eaten protein bar, and a sea of work emails I could ignore until my second cup. But this morning started with something else. I was halfway through sorting logistics for a medical symposium when the subject line popped up on my screen. Bold, cheerful, and completely gutting. Brooks Family Beach Week 2025 RSVP now. My breath caught. I clicked before I could stop myself. Everyone was CCD, Trinity, my older sister, Bryce, her husband, Aunt Mel, even cousin Darren, who'd been MIA since the Clinton administration. But my name wasn't there, not in the thread, not in the original list, not even as a typo. They hadn't just forgotten me. I wasn't included at all. I stared at the screen like it had slapped me. There they were, dozens of replies, little quips, memories from last year. Someone even posted a photo of the fire pit at sunset, the same fire pit where I roasted marshmallows at age 8 before I knew that love in this family came with terms and expiration dates. I scrolled lower, hoping stupidly for a second email. A correction, anything, but I already knew better. This wasn't the first time. Last year's invite must have gone to spam, Trinity had said when I called her crying. You know how tech can be, she'd added with a chuckle, as if erasing me from the family calendar was a software glitch. I closed the thread and just sat there. My office suddenly felt too big, too sterile. The framed degree on my wall looked like it belonged to someone else. The sunlight bouncing off the Santa Monica skyline felt like a cruel joke, California warmth with a cold void in my chest. I turned to my bookshelf almost unconsciously, and there it was, the turquoise glass seashell. It sat on the second shelf behind outdated industry manuals and a neglected jade plant, a birthday gift from when I was 10. My mom had picked it up at a roadside antique store and told me it looked like something special for her special girl. That was before she started calling Trinity her pride, before she began introducing me to her friends as the one who's always busy with work, before I learned that being the youngest didn't mean being loved more. It just meant being useful longer. You okay? I jumped. Remington was standing by my desk, holding his mug of oversteeped green tea. I swallowed. Yeah, just a spam email. He raised an eyebrow. From them again. I didn't answer, just offered a tight-lipped smile and went back to my laptop. But I didn't reopen the symposium document. My hands hovered, and then I shut the laptop completely. The promotion packet was still on my desk. Senior Vice President at 38, the youngest candidate in the firm's history, the title I'd bled for. Surviving boardroom politics, 12-hour days, and being overlooked by men with fewer ideas and more golf trophies. And yet, none of that mattered. Not to them. To them, I was the one who moved too far, worked too much, and forgot her roots. My phone buzzed. A text from Savannah. Saw the invite. Want to crash it just for laughs. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I typed, or maybe it's time I did something smarter. I opened the tab I'd bookmarked weeks ago. Real estate listings, specifically the beach house. The house where Trinity took her maternity photos. The house where my parents toasted their 30th anniversary while I was at a conference and forgot to even tell me. It was up for sale quietly, not on the open market yet, but listed in a private financial newsletter that Remington had forwarded to me. The market had dipped, and they were offloading it like old furniture. I stared at the listing, the wraparound porch, the view of the water, the same chairs where I'd once listened to my dad read Steinbeck aloud before he started pretending he couldn't hear my calls. So, this was what they'd come to. I moved the cursor slowly over the button. Contact agent. My finger hovered and clicked. The confirmation email from the realtor hadn't even sunk in when my phone rang. Same ringtone I'd assigned to her years ago. Same feeling in my chest. Tight, expectant, resigned. I didn't even need to look at the screen. I knew it was her. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, Mom," I said flatly, already bracing. "Kaya, dear," she began, using that voice, that sugary sing-song tone she pulled out when she was about to do something she knew would hurt, but wanted to sound polite while doing it. I didn't wait for the rest. "Let me guess. Trinity's kids need the bunk room again. Or maybe Nelson's new girlfriend is allergic to hotel pillows." There was silence long enough for me to imagine her blinking at her perfectly manicured nails, searching for the next line in her script. Then finally, she said, "You know how chaotic it gets with little ones. And we're just limited in space this year." I wanted to laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. I could have written her dialogue for her. "You understand, don't you, Kaya?" she added gently, almost pitifully. "It's just logistics." I remembered that same phrase from 2 years ago. Same time of year, same voice. The last time I tried to attend, she had called me the day before, whispering apologies like confessions in a booth. "You understand, don't you?" she'd said then, too. "The little ones need the bunk room." And I did understand. I understood that my presence was always optional to them. The only time I was truly needed was when someone wanted help paying for something. "I understand perfectly," I said. "Thanks for the heads up." Before she could respond, I ended the call, but I didn't throw my phone. I didn't cry. I didn't scream into a pillow. I simply got up, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water with the steadiness of someone who'd known this was coming. Back at my desk, I opened a spreadsheet. My personal financials. The numbers stared back at me like loyal soldiers, organized, unflinching, ready. I checked the amount of liquid cash I had access to, reviewed the vesting dates on my company stock options, scanned the line item labeled discretionary assets. Then I whispered, "Let's play then." The ocean breeze carried a chill as I stepped into the narrow hallway of the storage facility. The scent of dust and concrete was oddly grounding, like the scent of memory itself. Unit 43B. I hadn't opened it in nearly 5 years. The lock clicked open. I pushed the roll-up door upward, its metal teeth groaning in protest. Inside were pieces of a life I'd shed. My first apartment's furniture, boxes labeled college, a crate of books from my days chasing corporate dreams, heels too tight and blazers too sharp. In the far corner sat the old cedar trunk my grandmother's. I pulled it forward and brushed off the film of time that coated it. The latch was stiff, but it gave way with a determined tug. Inside, the familiar scent of lavender sachets she used to keep in her dresser drawers. My throat tightened. The first thing I saw was the journal, ocean blue with seashells glued to the corners in her unmistakably clumsy pattern. I used to tease her about it. "They'll fall off in a week," I'd said once, and she'd smiled. "Then you'll have to glue your own truth to it." Underneath was a sealed envelope addressed in her slanted script. "For Kaya. Open only when you stop looking for permission." I sat cross-legged on the concrete floor and opened it. Inside was a letter and a trust document. The letter was short, just a few lines. "One day you'll understand why I left this just for you. Love doesn't always come from those who raise us. Sometimes it finds its way through the cracks. Use this when the silence becomes unbearable." I blinked, rereading it. The trust document was real, not symbolic, not sentimental legal. I flipped pages with trembling hands. My name, her signature, witnesses. It detailed how my grandmother had been quietly contributing to the beach house's mortgage and upkeep for decades. She'd established a trust fund in my name, giving me substantial legal interest in the property. One clause stood out. Should the existing deed holders become financially delinquent or fail to meet property obligations, the named beneficiary reserves the right to execute a full title transfer. I didn't understand it all, but I knew enough, and I knew exactly who could explain the rest. By the time I walked into the law offices of McCarran and Wells in Newport Beach the next morning, I was already 5 steps ahead of where I had been just days ago. The woman behind the desk, Maribel, offered coffee while I waited. 10 minutes later, I sat across from a partner in his 60s with glasses perched low on his nose and a folder labeled Trust A, Brooks Estate. He flipped through the pages with a soft whistle. "This clause," he said, tapping one line, "isn't just enforceable, it's a fail-safe. Your grandmother paid 30% of the original purchase price and has been covering property taxes for the past 18 years. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses, and according to county records, your parents have indeed fallen behind on property taxes for the past 3 quarters. They've also allowed the insurance to lapse. What does that mean, exactly? It means that under this trust agreement, you can petition for title transfer. The process will take about 60 days, including required notifications to the current owners, and my parents would be notified. Yes, they'd have the right to contest, but given the documentation here, they wouldn't stand much chance. And the property is currently for sale. Yes, but they can't legally sell it without resolving the trust issue first. Your grandmother was quite thorough in her legal protections. I let the weight of that settle. 60 days. By the time the transfer would be complete, they'd be packing coolers and loading beach chairs, assuming the house was still theirs to decorate. Would I be obligated to inform them immediately? The trust administrator would send official notification, but there's no obligation for you to have that conversation personally. On the drive back to my hotel, I thought about my father. Not the man who'd become distant and dismissive over the past decade, but the one who used to carry me on his shoulders along the shoreline, naming each seabird we spotted. Robert Brooks had been a different man then present, affectionate, proud. I remembered him teaching me to skip stones across the water, his patience never wavering even after my 20th failed attempt. He'd whisper, "The ocean has its own timeline. Kaya bird, you can't rush the waves." Then came Trinity's first pregnancy, Mom's shift in attention, Dad's gradual withdrawal into himself, the stroke 3 years ago that had left his right side weakened. I was the one who flew home immediately when it happened. I was the one who arranged the specialists and the physical therapy. I was the one who sat by his bedside for 2 weeks, only to be told when I left that we'll take it from here. Despite never being invited to family gatherings, I visited him regularly. He was always alone during my visits, Iris conveniently shopping or at appointments. Our conversations grew shorter, his responses more automatic, but occasionally, I'd catch a glimpse of the father I remembered, a fleeting shine in his eyes, when I told him about a difficult diagnosis I'd helped solve, or the way his hand would find mine when we watched the sunset from his porch. When I returned to my hotel, I opened my laptop and pulled up the listing for the beach house again. A new photo had been added, the front porch adorned with twinkle lights, ready for summer guests. I stared at it for a long time, then picked up my phone and called Savannah. "Hey," she answered on the first ring. "You okay?" "I need your advice," I said. "But first, I need you to know this isn't about revenge." She was quiet for a moment. "I know you better than that, Kay. This is about finally standing up for yourself, isn't it?" I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "I found a way to buy the beach house." Holy shit. Grandma left me a trust. "They've been negligent with the property. I have legal standing." "And you're sure about this? This is going to be nuclear." "I'm not doing it to hurt them," I said softly. "I'm doing it because for once, they'll have to acknowledge I exist. They'll have to say my name." "Then do it," she said without hesitation, "and I'll be right beside you when you do." That night, I drafted the petition. No rage fueled my typing. No tears blurred my vision. Just clarity, cold and precise as surgery. I said. The next 45 days passed in a blur of legal paperwork, financial arrangements, and preparations. The trust administrator sent the official notification to my parents' home address 3 weeks after I filed the petition. I waited for the phone to ring for the accusatory calls, the family text chain exploding with outrage. Nothing came. "They probably think it's a mistake," Savannah said when I called her, puzzled by the silence. "Or they're ignoring it, hoping it will go away." But the legal process continued without objection. No contest was filed. No lawyer contacted mine. On day 58, I received the email from my attorney. "Transfer complete. The deed is in your name as of 9 a.m. this morning." That same afternoon, I received a notification from the property management company that handled the beach house rentals. The Brooks family had booked their usual week, starting in just 3 days. I logged into the owner's portal with my new credentials. There they were, the room assignments, the meal preferences, all listed under my mother's name, despite the fact that she no longer owned the property. I made a single change to the reservation. I added myself to the master suite, the room with the ocean view that Nelson always claimed first. Then I waited. When the day arrived, I drove to the coastal town where my childhood summers had been spent. I checked into a small hotel a mile from the beach house and watched the time tick by. According to Savannah, who still had access to the family group chat, they were all arriving between 3 and 5 p.m. At 6:30, I pulled into the driveway of the beachfront property. Through the large windows, I could see them already gathered in the living room, glasses in hand, laughter floating out to the porch, Trinity's children racing between adults' legs, my mother arranging flowers on the dining table. I sat in my car for a moment, watching them. My hand rested on the door handle, but I didn't immediately push it open. I wasn't nervous. I was memorizing the moment, the last minute of their world before I changed it. Finally, I stepped out and walked to the front door. I had keys now, but I chose to ring the doorbell. Nelson answered, his smile dropping the instant he saw me. "Kaya, what are you doing here?" "Hello, Nelson? I'm checking in." He blocked the doorway, confusion washing over his face. "Checking in? What are you talking about? This is a private family gathering." "I know, I'm family." I handed him a folder. "And I own this house now." His eyes widened as he flipped through the papers. Behind him, the conversation in the living room had quieted. I could see Trinity approaching, curiosity on her face. "What's going on?" she asked. Nelson didn't answer. He was still staring at the documents. "Your sister says she owns the house," he finally managed. Trinity laughed, the kind of laugh reserved for absurd jokes. "What are you talking about? Mom and Dad have owned this place for 30 years. Not anymore," I said, stepping past Nelson into the foyer. "The property transferred to me 2 days ago. Legally, fully, irrevocably." The room fell silent. My mother, who had been arranging a platter of cheese, froze with a knife in hand. "That's impossible," she said. "Actually, it's not." I set my bag down calmly. "Did you know Grandma established a trust in my name? Did you know she'd been paying the property taxes for nearly 2 decades? Or that when you let the insurance lapse and missed 3/4 of tax payments, it triggered a clause allowing full title transfer?" Trinity shook her head slowly. "This is ridiculous. You can't just walk in here and claim." "I'm not claiming anything. It's already done. You can verify with the county recorder's office if you'd like." My mother set down the knife with a sharp click against the marble counter. "So this is how you're going to get back at us, by stealing the family home." I didn't steal anything. I exercised my legal right to a property that's been neglected, just like you've neglected to include me in these gatherings for the past 10 years. The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. I could feel every eye in the room on me: aunts, uncles, cousins. Some confused, some angry, some merely curious about the drama unfolding. Finally, my mother spoke again, her voice carefully controlled. "We should discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss. The property is mine. You're welcome to stay for your planned vacation. I've already confirmed your rooms in the system." Trinity stepped forward, arms crossed. "And then what, you're going to kick us out of our own tradition? It's not your tradition anymore." "Trinity, it's mine." I met her gaze steadily. "Next year, you can ask me if you'd like to be invited." Nelson's phone rang, breaking the tension. He glanced at the screen, then at me, his expression shifting from anger to something else. "It's your father." I held out my hand. "I'll take it." He hesitated, then handed me the phone. "Hello, Dad," I said, walking onto the porch for privacy. "Kaya?" His voice sounded older than the last time we'd spoken. "Nelson just texted me about the house." "Is it true?" "Yes, it's true." A long pause. "Grandma's trust." "You knew about it," I said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Another pause. "She made me promise not to tell your mother. Said it was protection for you, for later. You never mentioned it." I thought. His voice faltered. "I thought you wouldn't need it. I thought we'd be better than we are." I leaned against the porch railing, watching the waves in the distance. "Why did you let them exclude me all these years?" The silence stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. "I was weak," he finally said. "After the stroke, everything felt too difficult. It was easier to go along, to not fight back. I told myself you were strong enough without us. I shouldn't have had to be." "No." His voice broke slightly. "You shouldn't have." When I returned inside, the atmosphere had shifted. Trinity and my mother were huddled in the kitchen, whispering fiercely. Nelson was on another phone, his voice low and urgent. The others milled about awkwardly, caught in a family drama they hadn't anticipated. "I've spoken with Dad," I announced. "He's confirmed the trust's validity." My mother's head jerked up. "Robert knows about this." "He's always known." Trinity's face flushed red. "So what now? You're going to stand there and gloat while ruining our vacation?" "Not at all." I picked up my bag. I'm going to the master suite, which is reserved in my name. You're all welcome to continue your stay. The house is big enough for all of us, isn't it? That's what I've been told for years. As I climbed the stairs, I heard Trinity behind me. This isn't over, Kaya, not by a long shot. She was right about that. At least, the next morning, I came downstairs to find an empty kitchen. A note on the counter in my mother's handwriting. We've moved to the Sea Cliff Hotel. We'll be speaking with our attorney. I made myself coffee and took it to the porch. The house felt enormous without the noise of Trinity's children or the buzz of family conversation. But the silence wasn't heavy. It was clean, like the air after a storm. 3 days later, I received the notice from the court. Trinity and my mother had filed an emergency petition claiming I had exploited my father's diminished capacity to fraudulently obtain the property. A temporary injunction had been granted, preventing me from selling or altering the house until a hearing. I forwarded it to my lawyer, who called me within the hour. "This is weak," he said. "They're claiming your father was coerced, but the trust was established 20 years ago, long before his stroke, and the triggering conditions, the tax delinquency and lapsed insurance, those are objective facts, not matters of opinion. So what happens now? We go to court in 2 weeks. Bring everything you have. Documentation of family exclusion, any text messages or emails showing the pattern, and we'll need your father's testimony. He's not strong enough to appear in person. Video deposition will work fine. That is, if he's willing." I thought of his voice on the phone, the broken admission of weakness. "He will be." The media caught wind of the case the day before the hearing. Not national news, but the local paper ran a story. Family beach house battle daughter claims parents' property through trust. Loophole. I refused all requests for comment. This wasn't about public opinion. It was about finally being heard by the people who had systematically silenced me. The courthouse was smaller than I'd imagined, the kind of place where local disputes over property lines and minor civil cases were settled with little fanfare. But as I approached the entrance, I saw Trinity and my mother already speaking with a reporter, my mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Savannah met me at the steps, linking her arm through mine. "Don't look at them," she murmured. "They're playing for sympathy." Inside, the courtroom was half filled, mostly family members and a few curious locals. My father wasn't there, but I hadn't expected him to be. His video deposition had been recorded the previous day with both attorneys present. One. The judge, an older woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, called the case with little preamble. Trinity's attorney went first, a polished man in his 40s with carefully cultivated empathy in his voice. "Your Honor, this case revolves around a family home with decades of memories and traditions, now under threat because of an obscure trust document that was never meant to be exercised. Ms. Gellhorn has exploited a technical loophole to seize this property from her elderly parents, one of whom is in fragile health following a stroke." He went on to describe how devastated my family was, how the beach house represented the center of their emotional lives, how I had acted out of spite rather than legitimate legal interest. When my turn came, I opted to speak for myself rather than have my attorney take the lead. "Your Honor, I'd like to begin by clarifying that this trust was not obscure or unknown. It was established by my grandmother 20 years ago with my father's full knowledge and consent. I submitted the original trust documents, the county records showing tax delinquency, and the lapsed insurance policy. As you can see, the conditions that triggered the transfer were objective and documented, but what isn't in these papers is the context." I took a deep breath. For the past 10 years, I have been systematically excluded from family gatherings held at this house. I have emails, text messages, and witness statements confirming this pattern. I submitted the digital evidence. Savannah had helped me compile dozens of communications showing my deliberate exclusion, including screenshots of group chats where Trinity and others disparaged me. I didn't pursue this transfer to hurt my family. I pursued it because after a decade of being treated as if I didn't exist, I wanted them to acknowledge that I do. The judge reviewed the evidence carefully, occasionally looking up to study my face or glance at my mother and sister. "I'd like to view the video deposition from Robert Brooks now," she finally said. The courtroom fell silent as the screen flickered to life. My father appeared, seated in his home office, looking frailer than when I'd last seen him, but clear-eyed and composed. The questioning began with basic competency assessment, which he passed easily. Then came the critical questions. "Mr. Brooks, were you aware of the trust established by your mother-in-law regarding the beach property?" "Yes, I helped her set it up." "And why did you agree to this arrangement?" My father paused, his hands folded in his lap. "Because I knew Kaya would need protection." "Protection from what?" He glanced down briefly. "From being forgotten, from being pushed aside. My wife, Iris, has always favored our older daughter. I thought it would balance out as they grew up, but it only got worse. The trust was meant to ensure Kaya always had a place in the family, literally and figuratively." "Did Ms. Gellhorn coerce or pressure you regarding this property in recent years?" "No. In fact, she visited me more than anyone else after my stroke, despite never being invited to family gatherings. She never mentioned the trust or the house during those visits." "One final question. Mr. Brooks, do you support Ms. Gellhorn's claim to the property?" His answer came without hesitation. "Yes, the house should be hers. She's the only one who ever asked how I was doing, not what I could give." When the video ended, I could hear my mother's muffled sob from across the courtroom. Trinity sat rigid, her face unreadable. The judge called a 30-minute recess. When she returned, her decision was swift and clear. "Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, this court finds no basis for claims of exploitation or coercion. The trust established by Adelaide Brooks was legally binding, and the conditions that triggered transfer of ownership were objectively met. Furthermore, Robert Brooks has clearly stated his support for the transfer." She looked directly at my mother and sister. "This court is not here to resolve decades of family resentment or to validate behavior that has clearly caused harm. The property legally belongs to Ms. Kaya Gellhorn. The temporary injunction is lifted, and the plaintiff's petition is dismissed." As we filed out of the courtroom, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a profound sense of exhaustion. Trinity brushed past me without a word. My mother paused briefly, her eyes red-rimmed. "I hope you're satisfied," she whispered. "I'm not, Mom. I never wanted it to come to this." She shook her head slightly and walked away. Outside, Savannah squeezed my hand. "You okay?" "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. "Ask me tomorrow." But tomorrow brought an unexpected visitor. As I sat on the porch of the beach house, watching the early morning fog roll over the water, a car pulled into the driveway. My father eased himself out of the passenger seat, his caregiver helping him navigate the steps. I met him halfway. "Dad?" "I thought we should talk," he said simply, "in person this time." We settled on the porch, the caregiver discreetly withdrawing to the car. "I'm sorry," he began, his voice steady despite the effort it clearly took. "Not for the house, for the years before it." I studied his face, the deep lines that hadn't been there a decade ago, the slight droop on one side from the stroke, the eyes that still held the same blue as mine. "Why did you let it happen?" He looked out toward the ocean. I told myself I was keeping the peace. That's what men of my generation do. We avoid conflict, especially with our wives. But the truth is, I was a coward. I saw how they treated you, and I did nothing. You could have called me, visited me, anything. I know. He reached for my hand, his grip weaker than I remembered, but still warm. After the stroke, I convinced myself it was too late, that you wouldn't want to hear from me anyway. I visited you every month for 3 years. Yes, a small smile touched his lips. You did. The only one who did. We sat in silence for a while, watching a pair of pelicans glide over the waves. What happens now? He finally asked. I don't know. I didn't plan past the hearing. Will you keep the house? I considered the question. Yes, not to keep them out, but to have a place that's mine, that can't be taken away. He nodded slowly. Good. It should have been yours all along. As he was leaving, he turned back. You know, your grandmother once told me something about you. She said, that girl thinks in tides. I didn't understand it then, but I think I do now. What did she mean? That you understood something the rest of us didn't, that there's a natural rhythm to things, a time to retreat, and a time to return stronger than before. I watched his car disappear down the road, feeling something shift inside me, not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of it, like the first breath after being underwater too long. The weeks that followed were quiet. I took a leave of absence from work and stayed at the beach house, sleeping in different rooms each night as if getting to know the place anew. I cleaned out closets, sorted through decades of accumulated possessions, and discovered forgotten corners that held unexpected treasures. In the attic, I found boxes of my childhood artwork that I'd assumed had been discarded years ago. In a hall closet, a collection of seashells I'd gathered over summers, each labeled in my careful child's handwriting. Even my teenage journals, stacked neatly in a drawer of the desk in what had once been my room. They hadn't erased me entirely. They had simply hidden me away. I was sorting through a cabinet in what had been my grandmother's sewing room when I found it the seashell wind chime we'd made together when I was 8. It was tangled and dusty, several shells cracked, the pale blue string frayed to near breaking. I carried it carefully to the kitchen table and began the slow work of restoration, not fixing it to look new, but strengthening what remained. I replaced the worn string with new fishing line, gently cleaned each shell without trying to hide its chips and cracks, and added a few new shells I'd collected on morning walks. Not every broken thing needs to be replaced. Kaya, my grandmother had once said, some things just need a steadier hand. As I worked, I thought about her how she'd seen what was happening in the family long before I had, how she'd created the trust as a safeguard, knowing someday I might need it, not as a weapon, but as protection, a way to reclaim my place when no one else would make room for me. The day I hung the wind chime from the porch beam, I received a text from Savannah. Trinity's posting on social media about being unfairly evicted from her childhood home. Want me to respond? I thought about it, then wrote back, no need. Let her have her story. I have the deed. That evening, a knock came at the door. I opened it to find an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes. Mrs. Donnelly. I recognized her from childhood summers, the neighbor who always had lemon cookies and Band-Aids for skinned knees. I saw the lights on and thought I'd welcome you properly, she said, holding out a small basket. Your father told me you'd be staying here now. You've spoken with him. She nodded. We've kept in touch over the years. He used to talk about you, more than the others. Always said you were the smart one. I blinked. He did, of course. Said you were the one who asked about the tide tables when you were 6. She smiled. That girl thinks in tides, he told me once. I never forgot that. I stood there, the basket suddenly heavier than it should have been. Thank you for telling me that. After she left, I sat on the porch steps, watching the wind chime sway in the evening breeze. Its soft music was hesitant at first, then grew stronger as the wind picked up like a voice remembering how to speak. The following weekend, I invited Savannah and Remington to visit. We spent the day walking the shoreline, gathering driftwood for an evening fire, and cooking seafood in the kitchen that had once felt so forbidden to me. As we sat around the fire pit that evening, the flames casting long shadows across the sand, my phone buzzed with a text. At the Seacliff Hotel. Could I stop by tomorrow, Dad? I showed it to Savannah. Are you ready for that? She asked. I don't know, but I think it's time to find out. When he arrived the next afternoon, he wasn't alone. My father stood on the porch with a hesitant smile and a small potted plant in his hands. Basil, he explained, handing it to me. Mom always said flowers were too showy. Give her something useful. I laughed despite myself. She did say that. We sat on the small bench swing that had been there since I was a child, gently rocking with the rhythm of the waves. The silence between us was different now, not heavy with unspoken accusations, but patient, waiting. I spoke with your mother yesterday, he finally said. I tensed slightly. How did that go? About as well as you'd expect. He sighed. She's hurt, angry, convinced this was all a calculated attack. And Trinity is. He paused, searching for the right words. Trinity has always needed to be first, to be best. She sees this as you winning something she can't have. I shook my head. This wasn't about winning. I know that. I think, deep down, they do too. He looked out at the ocean. They just don't know how to admit they were wrong. The wind chime tinkled softly above us, drawing his attention. You fixed it, he said, surprise in his voice. Your grandmother's chime. I found it in her old sewing room. He reached up, gently touching one of the shells. You know, she made this with you because she saw something in you that reminded her of herself. Stubborn, resilient. His eyes crinkled at the corners. She used to say you were the only one who understood that broken didn't mean worthless. We talked until the sun began to set, real conversation, not the cautious small talk of recent years. He told me about his physical therapy, about the books he'd been reading since the stroke, about his regrets. I told him about my promotion, my friends in California, my life that had grown rich despite the family-shaped hole in it. When Savannah returned from her beach walk, she joined us without awkwardness. My father seemed genuinely interested in her life, asking questions about her work as an architect, laughing at her stories about our college adventures. As evening approached, he stood to leave. I should get back before it gets too dark. I walked him to his car, where his caregiver waited patiently. Will you come again? I asked. If you'll have me. He hesitated, then added, I'd like to try to be your father again, not just someone who shares your DNA. I didn't answer right away, letting the weight of his words settle. I'd like that too, I finally said, but it will take time. Time is something I've wasted enough of, he replied. I don't intend to waste any more. After he left, I rejoined Savannah on the porch. So that happened, she said, handing me a glass of wine. It did. How do you feel? I considered the question. Like I'm standing on the shore after a hurricane? Everything's different, but the ground is still there. And Trinity, your mom. I don't know. I took a sip of wine. That's up to them now. 2 days later, I received an email from Trinity. No greeting, just a terse paragraph. Nelson and I will be bringing the kids to Myrtle Beach for Thanksgiving. Mom and Dad are welcome to join us there instead of at the house. I'm sure you understand that we need family traditions to continue uninterrupted. I stared at it for a long time, recognizing the old pattern, the exclusion, the rewriting of reality. But this time, it didn't hurt. It just felt predictable, like watching clouds form before rain. I wrote back a single line. The invitation to join me here remains open, should you ever change your mind. That night, I called Remington to discuss my return to work. The board is getting antsy, he warned. Peterson's been using your absence to make his case for the VP position. Let him try, I said. I'll be back next week. You sure you've got enough leave saved up to take another month? I'm sure. I've done what I needed to do here. The morning I was set to leave, I took one final walk along the shore. The tide was coming in, waves washing over my footprints almost as soon as I made them. I thought about what my father had said that I thought in tides. Maybe that was true. Maybe I had always understood that retreating wasn't the same as surrendering, that there was power in knowing when to wait and when to advance. As I turned back toward the house, I noticed a figure sitting on the steps of the back porch. For a moment, I thought it might be my father, but as I drew closer, I realized it was my mother. She wore a sweater I didn't recognize, her hair looser than she usually wore it. She looked up as I approached, her expression unreadable. "Mom, the gate was unlocked," she said, as if that explained her presence. "It usually is." I stopped a few feet away. "Dad didn't mention you were coming?" "He doesn't know." She smoothed her hands over her knees. "I wanted to see it." "To see what you've done with it." I glanced at the house behind her. "Not much, really. Cleaned, organized some things." She nodded slowly. "I saw the wind chime. You fixed it." It seemed important to save what I could. A long silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of waves and distant gulls. "I don't understand why you did this," she finally said. "Why you couldn't just let us have this one thing." I sat down beside her, leaving space between us. "It wasn't about taking something from you, Mom. It was about claiming something for myself. Something I'd been excluded from for too long. We didn't exclude you. You moved away. You built your own life. I moved away because there wasn't room for me here. Because no matter what I achieved, it was never enough to earn a place at the table." She started to object, then stopped, looking out at the water. "Is that really how you felt?" "It's how you made me feel. Every time an invitation didn't come. Every time Trinity's accomplishments were celebrated while mine were footnotes. Every time Dad tried to include me and you found a reason why there wasn't enough space." She didn't respond immediately, and I didn't push. We sat side by side, watching the water. Two women who shared blood but had become strangers. "I don't know how to fix this," she finally said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Neither do I admitted. "But maybe we start by being honest, by acknowledging what happened instead of pretending it didn't." She nodded slightly. "Your father wants to have Christmas here, with you. I'd like that. He wants me to come too." She glanced at me. "Would that be all right?" I thought about it, about all the Christmases I'd spent alone or with friends, about the ache that never quite went away. "Yes," I said, "that would be all right." She stood, brushing sand from her pants. "I should go. Your father will wonder where I am." "You could stay," I offered. "Have coffee, see the inside." She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not today, but maybe soon." I watched her walk to her car, her steps measured and careful across the sand. She didn't wave as she drove away, and I didn't expect her to. This wasn't a reconciliation, not yet, but it was a beginning, a crack in the wall that had stood between us for so long. Back inside, I finished packing my suitcase. I'd be back in California by evening, back to my office and apartment and the life I'd built without them. But something had shifted. The beach house wasn't just a victory or a statement anymore. It was a possibility, a space where broken things could be mended, if we were willing to try. Before leaving, I walked through each room, making sure windows were locked and lights were off. In what had been my childhood bedroom, I paused at the small desk where I'd written school essays and secret diaries. On impulse, I opened the drawer and took out a piece of paper. Dear Trinity, I wrote, "The master suite is yours whenever you're ready to visit. The door is always open." I left it on the kitchen counter, knowing the cleaning service would find it during their weekly check. Whether she ever read it or not, it was there an offering, not a demand. As I locked the front door, the wind chimes sang in a sudden breeze, shells clicking against each other like gentle applause. I smiled, remembering my grandmother's words. Not every broken thing needs to be replaced, I whispered to the empty porch. Some things just need a steadier hand. I drove away with the windows down, salt air filling the car. The beach house grew smaller in my rearview mirror, but it didn't disappear. It would be there waiting, a place where my name was finally spoken not in anger or accusation, but in recognition, a place where, someday, we might all find our way back to each other, carried by the same tide that had once pulled us apart. I wasn't fighting for a seat at their table anymore. I had built my own. And perhaps, in time, they would understand that there had always been room for everyone if only they had been willing to make space. Until then, I would wait, patient as the ocean, resilient as shells shaped by sand and storm, my own person, in my own place, thinking in tides. As the sun sets over the beach house, I hang the newly restored seashell wind chime on the porch, each broken piece carefully mended. Not to erase the damage, but to honor the journey. The soft music it makes in the breeze reminds me of my grandmother's words. Not every broken thing needs to be replaced. Some things just need a steadier hand. I didn't buy this house to burn bridges. I bought it to build my own. Perhaps one day they'll cross it. My father already has. My mother might. Trinity time will tell. But I no longer measure my worth by their acceptance. The deed in my name is more than ownership of property. It's ownership of my story. I didn't fight for a place at their table. I created my own one where everyone is welcome, but no one is forgotten. As I lock up to return to my life in California, I smile at the wind chime's gentle song. I am not waiting for their apologies anymore. I am moving with the tides, retreating when necessary, advancing when ready, and always, always knowing my own worth.